Today I sat down with Lynn Forney to discuss her harrowing personal story about being stabbed 7 times by a stranger in the middle of the night. This was a deep dive into what happened to her that night, as well as how she physically survived it, the police believing she stabbed herself, the process she went through to mentally deal with the trauma, and the book she eventually wrote. With that, here's my discussion with Lynn Forney. Hello and welcome to the RSnake Show. Today I have Lynn Forney. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing well. Had a little mix-up today getting you out here, but we figured it out.
I did. I'm here.
It was definitely my fault, but that's okay.
I'm glad you're admitting that, because I was like, oh my God.
I don't know how it's my fault, but I will figure it out, and that's extreme ownership right there.
I appreciate that. I, too, am learning to take responsibility. These are totally falling off a little bit.
Get it comfortable.
I hope I didn't.
So we want to talk about your book, but I was trying to figure out a way to kind of dive into it, and I just couldn't do it. So I had to rewind the tape a little bit. So your story starts in 1998. I want to tell you what I was doing in 1998.
Okay.
I want to tell you what life was like in 1998.
Okay.
And then we can talk about your story. So in 1998, I had just quit college, and I was running a nonprofit designed to stop pedophiles from hurting people.
Oh, wow.
And I had gotten my very first very credible death threat as a result of that.
Wow.
And so it was a pretty intense, I would not say exactly good experience, but I learned a lot. Titanic was in the theaters.
Mm-hmm.
I think Armageddon and Saving Private Ryan.
Yeah.
So how was your 1998?
It sucked.
Yeah.
It's not good. It was not a great year. It started out actually pretty good.
Yeah.
And then by May, it was pretty awful.
Okay. Why don't you tell us what was life before that? What was the beginning of the year?
So I was a dance major, and I just changed my major to dance that spring, actually. And I'll admit I had some difficulty with depression kind of leading up to that, and I just felt literally like a weight was lifting. Like I'm like, this is where I belong. This is where I need to be. I'm finding, like my place, and I had really great friends and fantastic professors. Just everything felt like this is really okay. Like I feel like this is, I don't know, like stuff is looking up. Mm-hmm. And I was driving home in between semesters at school, and I literally was talking on the phone the night before to my girlfriend on my Garfield phone that I got when I was 10, and I love that phone. And so silly, wow. These silly things you remember, right? And I don't have that phone anymore, and I'm very sad. But I woke up. I also just bought Tori Amos's brand new CD from the Choir Girl Hotel. Mm. And I was listening to that on repeat. And my mom had gone out earlier that evening, and she came in to turn it off because I was listening to it, and I just passed out because I had worked at this drugstore and that day, and I got up at 5 o'clock in the morning to go there. And the next time I woke up, I felt these hands on my breast, essentially, and he was pulling me up. So I sleep on my stomach, and I was being pulled up from that, and I was kind of in the middle of waking up, and I hear this voice say, "Don't worry, I'm a friend of your mother's." And it was strange how I felt like I had 30 thoughts in a nanosecond or something. And I was thinking did she bring someone home?
What were those thoughts? Yeah.
Did she bring someone home? But no, my mom would never do that, especially with me here. And I don't know this, but what, it was just this very quick kind of rapid succession of is this my mom's friend? No, it's not my mom's friend. What the hell's going on? Who is this man? And I just kind of turned and looked, and, I just kind of dug my head down and just started flailing and screaming. And so at this point I was sitting on the bed, and he was to my left.
So how much time had elapsed? Was it
seconds?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So fast.
Yeah.
You reacted quickly.
Yes, very quickly. Because I'm literally I woke up mid lift, if that makes sense. And I'm not normally that deep of a sleeper, but I think I'd been up so early that I was so deeply asleep. And so me waking up, hearing that voice, and then turning and looking, and then just flailing and screaming. And I felt this really hard jab at my side, kind of towards the back. And I will say that's the only thing I felt. But I just kept screaming and screaming. I kept screaming, "Mom, 911, Mom, 911." I just kept screaming it over and over and over again. And but somehow I can't explain how I knew, but I knew I was getting stabbed. And it's just something I can't explain because I never saw the knife, and I didn't feel anything past that first initial kind of jab. Mm-hmm. And he got up, ran out of the room. I stood up, I looked down, and there was blood just pouring everywhere out of my body. And I looked up, and my mom came into the room because our bedrooms in that house were next to each other. Mm-hmm. And I just screamed. I was like, a man stabbed me, call 911. And she kind of, and again, it was the middle of the night, but she was like, there's no man here. And I'm like, just call 911, like I'm just.
Were the lights still out at this point?
The lights were out. Yeah. It was like 2:30ish in the morning. And we had these vertical blinds and one blind was missing. So there was this like very faint amount of moonlight coming into the room. And I don't know why she didn't turn on the lights. But again, it was just one of those, it was the middle of the night. And she rushed out of the room to try to call 911 and the phone was off the hook. Like I saw her kind of fly past my bedroom saying the phone's off the hook. And people often question that too, but I'm like, I didn't live there anymore, right? Like she always talked on the phone in her bedroom. So she just kind of went in there naturally to use that phone. She couldn't hear anything, so she went into the living room and picked up the phone at that point. And like I said, my Garfield phone was on the floor, and I just fell to the floor and picked up the receiver because I'm like, if I don't get an ambulance here, I'm dead. Like, this is it. And I could hear her talking to the dispatcher at that point, and I was like, oh, thank God. And I just kind of put the phone down, and I just laid on the floor, and she came back in, and she was trying to tie like a tourniquet, I think in her mind, around my leg because she could see that I had a hole in my leg that I was bleeding from. And yeah, it's a whole much more from there, but I don't know how far you can go.
Well, I've got a million questions. So, first of all, the stab wound on your back, it sounds like, or side back. Right mm-hmm. When you felt that, was that an intense pain, or is it more like getting punched than getting stabbed?
Kind of getting punched. Yeah, it just felt like this real hard jab, and that's the best way, again, I can describe it.
I'm sure everyone's been like, sort of stabbed by something, the side of something that's sharp or whatever.
Yeah.
You're like, ow, that hurts.
Right.
I think most people, what they actually are feeling is what they think they should feel. They're like, that actually didn't hurt that bad. The stabbing part didn't hurt bad, but their brain feels that other thing. Mm-hmm. But when you get stabbed very hard, you're actually feeling the punch more than the stab.
Right.
So that would make sense why you felt that one and the other ones maybe not so much.
I think my body, you just go into shock and like it's your body's protection, right? And so that's why some people like leave their body and like they don't remember anything, or everybody's experiences trauma differently. For this one, I remember everything like very, very clearly, but I do think my body just kind of went into shock to protect me from all that.
Did the tourniquet work at all?
It was like a bath towel, I don't know. I mean, I was concerned about it, but I literally could only focus on like, get the ambulance here. Where are they? Why aren't they here? I'm dying. Like she even told me later on, she's like, you just kept saying it over and over. Like, I'm dying, because I was dying. I mean, I was just rapidly losing all this blood. And, and she didn't understand what had happened to me. I was wearing a navy blue shirt and underwear, which is pretty unusual for me. Usually I'm in like some kind of pajamas, but I think having a dark t-shirt on, she couldn't see all the blood coming from my torso. She just saw that one wound on my leg. And the fire station is literally like across the house, or across the street from her house. And so that's why I couldn't understand why it took so long. But later on, I was explained that they had to wait for the police to get there because it was considered a crime scene. And, eventually they finally showed up, but it just felt like it took forever.
Do you know how long that was?
I don't. But it just
felt forever.
It felt like forever and ever.
So okay, what happened then? So they finally arrived, they assessed the situation. There's nobody there?
There's no one there. I remember because the lights were still off, oddly enough, because I remember a flashlight being like, in my face, and someone was saying, honey, we're the police, we're here to help you. And then kind of like a group of men entering my room. And it was kind of chaotic because there were a lot of, there were police there and also like the EMS workers. And I do remember them saying like, there's another one. Oh my God, there's another one. And they were basically seeing all my stab wounds as I cut my shirt off. And at one point, like I was like, I'm going to throw up. And so I threw up all over the floor, and and I remember one of them saying like, I can't handle throw up. And I was like, I'm sorry. Like I'm literally apologizing for, something that I can't control.
Right.
And it's just interesting to think back on those kinds of things. But
I'm surprised the police would say they can't handle throw up. I mean,
I think it was an EMS guy actually.
Oh, what?
Yeah, I know. It was kind of strange, but I was like, I'm sorry. I know. I'm sitting here apologizing as I'm bleeding and dying everywhere. But it's just in my nature. I don't know. I grew up, I have Southern parents. I don't know. I still have to be very polite, but I just remember like, just get me to the hospital. Just get me to the hospital. That's all I want at this point. And but it was just like this chaos around me. And they did finally get me up on this flat board, and they were carrying me out of the house. And And I remember that they just wanted me to stay awake. But yeah, at that point, there was no other person in the house. They made my mom stay in like her room, basically. And I just, at that point got put into the ambulance.
They took you off to the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
So what was that like? I mean, that's got to have been a lot of surgery.
Yeah. I remember being in the ambulance, and the best way I can describe it is I knew exactly what had happened, but I wanted someone to explain to me what was happening. Like, what is happening? Why is this happening? Why did this why is this man do this to me? I don't understand what is going on, even though I very clearly knew exactly what had happened. So it's hard for me to describe that to someone who hasn't been in that sort of situation. But I was just so desperate for someone to tell me why. What is this, And I do remember having a really hard time staying awake. I promised them that I would stay awake, but I could not keep my eyes open, and I was just like, I'm here. And at one point I kind of started to pass out, and they were like, no, Lynn, no, stay awake. And I'm like, oh, okay, I'm here. And I'm trying, because it's, you're more likely to die at that point. And I remember getting into with the ER team, and again, it was just very chaotic. Like, there was these nurses and this doctor around me. And at one point I'm being asked about piercings, and then I'm feeling someone put a catheter inside, up my body. That was very
this
weird.
Is rated whatever.
Okay.
So say whatever you need to say.
I'm like, I don't know what I should say, but
a lot of people don't know what to say on this show. Say whatever you feel like.
Okay. So, I remember one of the nurse saying, like, someone saying, oh, she needs blood. And I was like, negative AB. Like, I'm just screaming out my blood type, it was just, and I had to laugh. I don't know. Like, my friend from 3rd grade was hearing this story, and she was like, that sounds like Lynn. Like, she couldn't help but laugh. Right. Because I don't know what other people would do. All I know is what I would do. And, I'm getting like piercings taken out, and I'm getting like, my leg was literally being held up by this woman, and she's like fingering me and putting this catheter in me. And I kind of literally looked at her like, what is going on? She's like, oh, I'm sorry. I have to put this catheter in. I'm like, okay. And, another point, they made me drink this really gross, disgusting drink because they had to see if I had internal bleeding, and they cut my belly button and put this tube in there, and they're like jamming this tube. And I could feel that. I mean, I could feel all of this going on. And I was like, can you just put me to sleep? I don't know if I want to feel all this anymore. Like, I'm kind of done. And he was like, well, we can't, the doctor, because again, you're more likely to die. And I'd be like, okay, can you just put me to sleep? Because it was horrible. I mean, it was horrible. And someone came and like sewed my ear up. And then, another doctor was trying to assess my hand because one of the stab wounds went across my wrist and cut all my tendons, my extensor tendons. And, and then they're trying to like, again, assess for internal bleeding. And it was a lot. I'd already experienced a lot to this point. And I'm like, I think I'd like to go to, just go to sleep now. And at one point they were trying to take me in for, I can't remember if it was a CAT scan or an MRI. I really don't, probably a CAT scan, but I do remember telling them like, I'm going to throw up. And I turned and threw up, and then I could I feel one of my stab wounds pop open, and I started bleeding everywhere. And I just looked back up, and I'm like, I'm bleeding. And at that point I was really going like into some serious critical state, because they just started running me down the hallway, and this nurse above me, she was like, your lips are really blue. And she was like yelling at them how blue my lips were. And I was just telling her like, I'm really cold. I just feel really cold. And this coldness from the inside out. Yeah. That again, that's the best way I can describe it.
Yeah.
And in my book, I really go through in detail those experiences, like the night getting stabbed and going into the hospital that first night from this first person perspective. Because I thought it'd be an interesting way to write that, but I also wanted people, because I could remember everything so clearly, that it was just kind of gives you this sense of being there with me and experiencing those things with me. And so like those are,
or even being you.
Right. And it's tough to read. I know it's difficult, especially for people that know me. I have a few friends that still haven't read it for that reason, but I bet. I hope that it gives people a more personal experience with that. And then they finally did put me to sleep, because they just had to do exploratory surgery at that point. And I remember saying like, thank you.
So you woke up in the hospital, and did you get a positive assessment at that point? They were looking pretty...
I was looking pretty terrible. They didn't know if I was going to live for a few more days, is what they told my parents. Yeah, I was on life support. So they had to put me on life support. So I woke up very briefly, and this nurse was standing there, and she's like, oh, hi, I just like to follow up with my patients. And I was kind of like, and I just passed back out. And the book actually opens with me waking up on life support for these very brief moments that I, again, remember very well, because I felt paralyzed. Like I could not move any of my muscles. And I just remember feeling so desperate, because it felt like I couldn't breathe.
Did they have you under a paralytic or something?
Probably. I'm
That's
guessing.
scary.
Yeah, it was very scary. And you have this, plastic tube down your throat and just felt like I couldn't breathe and I couldn't tell anyone. I couldn't speak, and I'm hearing kind of these, they're talking about me and they're like, oh, she's waking up. And then I just kind of pass back out. But I just sort of, again, from that first person perspective, kind of go through those moments. I mean, it's about a page and a half long, but it's because it was such a brief moment, but a really memorable one.
I bet.
Yeah.
So at what point did you kind of come out and you're like, now everything's starting to look good? And is that like a day or two later, you said?
I would say a little longer than that. I was in the ICU, like the critical ICU for a week. But I was in the hospital for a total of 16 days. And at one point I actually asked to leave. I was like, okay, can I go now?
No,
but
right.
that first week was pretty awful. It was awful. And I will say that I questioned how some of the nurses treated me. And at one point I had a psychiatrist asking me if I tried to stab myself.
What?
Yeah. Yeah. And I have often talked about what's worse, getting stabbed or getting questioned or not believed.
Okay.
And I jumped forward a lot.
Walk me through how someone thinks they stab themselves in the back.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
That doesn't...
So what happened, and again, I mentioned earlier that I suffered from depression and I actually was hospitalized for that when I was 19. But I felt like telling someone like I was depressed, not insane. Like I don't want to be disrespectful, but it's just like, there's no way someone can do this to themselves. Like you're full of shit. Mm-hmm. And that didn't even enter my mind that someone would ever even remotely think that until I was interviewed by that psychiatrist. And, cause I was on life support for about 5 days, I have to go back because I did read my medical records to put that in the book, but now I'm kind of like, it's easy for me to just kind of like, okay, bye. I don't need that anymore. But it was close to a week. It was honestly longer than I remember it being. But that first week was really awful. I mean, I've experienced so much pain I can't even describe to you. And I'm a dancer, right? Like we're used to like, you break your foot, you keep on going, right? And so like, I feel like I have a pretty high tolerance for pain. And it was, I mean, I just felt my skin was on fire. I was sweating profusely. I was trying to tell the nurses, like, I'm in a lot of pain. Like I'm in a lot of pain. And later on, when I read that psychiatrist's report, he said that they were describing me as being dramatic and possibly drug seeking. I mean, it was just I was so angry when I read that. I still have some anger about it, but
well,
yeah.
You should. I mean, that's pretty awful.
Yeah. And sorry, I totally went around your original question of how someone. So I think, so going back from the depression, like I think the other thing that was happening, and this is why I wrote a book because this story is so crazy.
No, yeah.
The police department had been trying to cover up crimes, and this did come out. Janet Reno, who was the Surgeon General at the time, launched an investigation into the Boca Raton Police Department a few years after the crime against me, and for that reason,
this is in Florida.
Yeah, this is in Boca Raton, Florida, and so I think that they were trying to connect. Oh, she was depressed. She'd been in the hospital. Oh, well, she's just someone who came in here and tried to kill herself and whatever. We'll just write her off because it's easy, right? It was an easy way for them to just not have to do their job. Is the best way I can describe it.
So they didn't do. Did they even bother to investigate this thing at all? Really?
I mean, they did, I guess. I don't know the procedures and the protocols, so I'm certainly not an expert. But I never felt like I was being taken as seriously as I should. I do remember telling the detective at one point, I'm like, "Do you have a daughter? How would you treat her? Because that's how I want you to treat me." I mean, I was 21, right? And he probably I think he did have a daughter close to my age. But they also asked me to take a lie detector test. So I went in and took a lie detector test, and that was really, again, I don't want to say humiliating, and that's not the right word, but it was just,
Wait, under what? Why? And why do you need to take one?
To see if I'd stab myself, I guess.
What physical evidence was there that you stabbed yourself?
There was zero. There wasn't even a knife in the room.
Yeah.
I mean, they literally found no knife. They found a tip of the knife because it broke on one of the bones in my wrist. That's what they found in the room.
This seems like incredibly shoddy police work to me.
Yeah. Yes.
I mean, not just bad, but like, what's the criminal malfeasance?
Yeah. It wasn't good. It wasn't the best detective work. I mean, and I'm a very kind person. I'm a Pisces. Like I try to people do their best, but did they? I don't think so. I'm going to say that they didn't. And, it's disappointing and it's horrifying. And I think how many other people have been treated that way. by people that are supposed to protect you and fight for you in a way. And it's just disgusting.
Not to get you more angry about this, but I got to know. So was this used as some of the evidence for their bad police work, or were you involved in that case at all?
I was not. I will say too, and just to be completely clear, is that this man was never actually convicted for my crime. I just kind of had to trust that this was the person because he had attacked many women.
So someone else was, what else is not the right word. Someone was caught, apprehended at some point.
Yes, like about 2 years after my attack, and the attacks did kind of stop did stop. It seemed after he was apprehended, and when someone asked me like, would you go back and want that to be reinvestigated? And I was like, well, I don't think they have evidence that they would need, and all it would do to me is I think just re-injure me like over and over again, like re-traumatize me essentially. And I'm just like, I have just chosen to like try to move forward and accept that, okay, I think this is the person that did this to me, because it was so dark. I couldn't see him very clearly. Like I knew certain aspects of what he looked like, but there was no way I could just be like, yes, this is the person. Mm-hmm. And that's partly why, they couldn't, take him to trial for me. And I did understand that, but also like, I don't know what they collected, if they collected. I mean, one of the questions that the police kept asking me was, were you drinking? Did you do any drugs? And I was just like, well, you had blood all over you could have taken, there was so much ample opportunity for you to take my blood. It was everywhere. Mm. So like, I don't know if that's something they can't do, but I'm like, you could ask me in that moment. I'd be like, sure, take it. I don't know, and that, he would be like, well, there's a bottle of wine in the fridge. I'm like, well, that was my mom's wine. I don't live here.
And also, who gives a shit? Right,
exactly. I'm pretty sure that doesn't make you stab yourself. But no. I was like, I don't even like wine. It's gross because, I'm like a sweet person. And I'm like, when I was in college, I was 21. But I'm like, I like Malibu. Like, I'm just like, no. And I had been to the drugstore to work. And I went to the mall the day before to buy my mom a gift for Mother's Day. Like, those are the things I was doing. Even if I was out clubbing and partying, I'm going to make it very clear. It should not matter. Yeah, who gives a shit? Exactly. But I was just so angry. I'm like, why didn't you take a sample of my blood? Like, why do you keep asking me this over and over and over again? Like, I've told you a million times, no. Like,
or
the answer's going to be no.
Or anything.
Yeah, right. And I'm just like, dude. And they also tried to accuse my mom, which again, I understand is a normal thing. And I remember telling him, like, this was the first day I was taken off life support. The detective was sitting there and he kept just trying to like, almost trick me. I felt like to tell, to admit that my mom did it. And I'm like, I would literally tell you to put that bitch in jail if my mom did this to me. That's exactly what I said. I said, my mom did not do this to me. A man did this to me. And I need you to go find this man. That's what I need you to do right now. Mm-hmm. Like, I remember just point blank, like, barely off life support telling him this.
Wow. That is crazy. So in the other cases where this perpetrator was convicted, were they similar?
There were a lot of similarities. I fully, again, feel or believe that he was going to rape me first. Another part of this too is like victim shaming that goes on. I had people tell me, well, you don't know that. I'm like, well, you don't know that. You weren't there. And it was just, again, like, what else was he there? Like I don't know. It's just, again, a feeling that I have. And, but he did attempted to rape other people. The cases he was convicted on, he was trying to rape a 17-year-old girl in her apartment complex. She was in the laundry area and he started to strangle her with a tie. He broke her jaw and she did manage to get away, but she obviously could see him very well. Mm-hmm. And then this other woman, this is, okay, again, 98. So not everyone had cell phones. He had knocked on her door and said, like, can I use the phone? My car's broken down. And she said, okay. And she started to close the door. And then he kind of pushed it open and stabbed her and then ran off. Mm-hmm. So some women he didn't sexually assault, but some he did. And then he was caught because he killed a woman who I think he was on like a date with. Mm-hmm. And that's how they ended up finding him, because she was like a regular at this restaurant and they were able to kind of connect that way.
Wow. So have you contacted the other victims at all?
No, because No, I do have this. I don't know if it's naive, but I was hoping that maybe like one of them would read this book somehow. And I had originally used his full name, and the publisher that I worked with kind of warned, she's like, you could get sued. I don't know. So I kind of just said David M. But the details I go into, and I quoted this article that came out about him and all the victims, and they would have to know like this is who it is. It's Boca, David M. Like, they're going to connect, especially if they were a victim. And so I do have this, like, maybe someone will see it or read it and we can connect that way.
Well, maybe one of the copious people who sees this can find your other halves out there.
Right. Because it would be really powerful. Because the other thing I will say is it's a very, I felt very alone, like, going through this. because it's not something that you meet a lot of people that this has happened to, and everyone's experience, regardless if everyone's like experiencing the same tragedy together. Let's say like I don't know, like 9/11 or something, for instance, like your individual experience is still gonna be different than the person standing next to you, but you still had this experience together. And this was very solitary.
I mean, if you were sitting right next to somebody and both saw a plane hit a building, you would have a very similar conversation afterwards and want to stay in touch, I'm sure.
Right.
So there weren't any like foot patterns outside, no like car skid marks getting drive away, nothing
that I know of or was told about. Here's another fascinating thing that was in the article I read. They were following him that night because they had known about this person. This is why it's even more aggravating. That's too soft of a word, but that they questioned me like this, because I'm like, you were literally following this person because you knew what he was doing. And they got called away on a drug case, and then I got stabbed, but then I still got put through hell and told to take a lie detector test, even though you were literally following this person that night. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's horrible.
Yeah. And what's weird is another weird thing is my mom was seeing a therapist at the time who happened to also be a police officer, but he worked for the Palm Beach County Department. And I was in the city limits of Boca. So I was dealing with the Boca Raton Police Department. And he had actually told us that. But again, I don't want to like, that was hearsay, but again, it was printed in that article. I'm getting basically validation that what he said was true. Not that I didn't believe him, but it's like, okay, here's two examples of he was being followed that night. So what the fuck?
So, so what was the time? You said it's 2 years difference between when your event happened and he was arrested. Arrested.
Yeah.
So in that time, they had been following him for some amount of time, I'm assuming?
Well, before me. I mean, they had been, I don't know, again, I can't remember the exact, because I did read through the article, but I don't know the exact, how many months it was, but I'm sure were following him after my attack as well.
Yeah, one would think.
Right.
And did they not think to question him?
If they can't connect him, I guess there's no
That's
reason
still useful.
I know, but
just, call him up.
Right, I know, right?
So visit.
Yeah.
Anything, right? Wow. So out of curiosity, how do you feel about police now? I mean, when you see a cop on the street, do you feel the same? Or
again, I have this Pollyanna type outlook where I really do see the potential of people. And sometimes I think it's beautiful, and sometimes I probably am a little bit too rose-colored glasses about things. So I've never been just like, oh, police are terrible and I hate them all. I've never felt that way, even though there's probably more and more evidence, because I do want to believe that people are doing their best, and it's extremely stressful job. And I can look at it from that perspective, but I did get called in for jury duty here in Austin years ago. And I remember the question they asked me were would you automatically believe a police's word? And I was like, no. But I'm
just the right answer.
Right, it is. But I'm like, no, I'm going to look at the facts and, figure it out. And of course I got asked to stay for the trial. But yeah, I mean, it's I'm going to try to look at the facts and take each person, or each story individually, rather than just blanket and say they're all terrible, or they're all great. They both exist.
Well, if Janet Reno found that they had other problems going on there, I mean, so the implication was that they did not want anyone to see there's a certain amount of crime
in Boca.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's this beautiful, pristine city. It's safe. It's crime free. Look at us. It's so magical. Is
we
kind
just
of
have a whole bunch of people being stabbed.
Right. And David, the guy that was doing all these things, was a rich guy, and he belonged to a country club. One of my
interesting.
Oh yeah, he drove a Porsche.
Wasn't a transient.
No. I mean, he was definitely I think his family money was deteriorating from what I read, but one of my friends who I danced with, her dad was a lawyer, and he literally said to her oh my God, I know him. He belongs to my country club.
Wow.
Yeah. So this is when, some transients, because that's what a lot of people assume, right?
Yeah.
This is someone crazy, or they're on drugs, or
certainly not
right.
all together there, but
right. That's fair and true. But you know what I mean? Someone who's just out of their mind. He, it's one of those things. By day, he was just had Playboy good looks, or GQ good looks, whatever it was. Sorry, not Playboy, but GQ good looks, and married models and dated models. I mean, he had very beautiful, girlfriends and wives, and then by night he was terrorizing women.
That is so insane. Interesting.
Yeah.
So no confession. It was all just a conviction. That's it.
Yeah.
Okay.
My parents went to the trial. So they were divorced at that time, but they did go to the trial. I didn't. I don't know. I just felt like I can't. I was trying to like move on with my life, I guess, but and what help is it going to do if I'm there or not there? I'm not being called for any reason. But my mom said at one point he just kind of laughed so they called his first wife. She had like divorced him and moved to California, and she said that he just started saying weird things like, "I like to follow women. Hey, I followed this woman one day," and she was just kind of like, and I'm out. I don't know the whole story behind that, but he just laughed. Like she said, he would just kind of laugh or smirk or like have this like kind of look on his face, like he was proud of himself or something. I don't know. I mean, I don't want to assume, but it's just, it was very strange.
Sounds like a deeply psychologically messed up person.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, the victimology would say that somebody of his nature probably is looking for anything outside of what is considered the norm or whatever, trying to find, anybody who doesn't meet some perception of what he thinks is the perfect thing, whatever it is.
Right.
But also, who knows, right? I
mean, I can't even, I've thought about it, but I can't answer that.
Yeah. That's crazy. Did you share any similarities with those women that you know of?
Most of us were within a similar age range, I would say probably about 16 to like 25-ish. There were definitely a few, like the woman that died was a little bit like, she was more, I think closer to 40 or maybe in her early 40s. When I read that article, there were young girls as young as like 8.
Wow.
But most of us were in that kind of, high school.
How many people do you think?
It was a lot. I mean, it was, I didn't go through and like count each one because I was just sobbing, like rereading this article and trying to write this chapter. But because I just felt like when I was reading it again, because I read it years ago, and then I was just like, another one. I mean, it was just like, my God, like this is more than I even remember because, again, it's like when you're that close to everything that happened, I did my best to skim it and then I was like, I can't keep reading this. But, I would say in the 20s, I don't know.
20, wow.
Yeah, I would say because he had even been convicted years before this for like rape and was in jail, and this, I'm like, so I think he'd been in jail twice and I'm just like, oh my God. Like,
wow. Any chance he's going to get out?
I hope to God not. If I can't remember how many years later, they did put him back on trial, and he was convicted of 2 life sentences, and I think that stuck. I don't think anything happened.
Okay. Well, let's hope.
Yeah.
Appeals, right?
Right.
Okay. So you mentioned that you had depression sort of before, kind of leading into this. How did that affect you after? I mean, that can't have helped too much, I would imagine.
Right. It's fascinating because when I was in the hospital, I had a few people like, are you going to be able to dance again? Because one of the stab wounds was through my leg, like on the side of it near my calf. It was a 6-inch steak knife. And so that went completely through my leg and severed my peroneal nerve, which basically flexes and everts your foot. So a very important thing that you need when you're dancing. And nerve damage is extremely slow to heal. And I'm lucky it healed as much as it did. But I never thought that I wouldn't. I was just like, well, of course I am. Like, yeah. And something about that, I was just like, damn, I'm like really strong. Like, it's just something about that experience made me realize like how strong I am, and if I can pull myself through this, like I can pull myself through anything. And I'm not going to say that I believe that every single day,
sure.
But in that moment, I just couldn't let myself, you can't let yourself lose hope. Right. But, I do remember feeling that way. Like I'm really strong. I have this huge strength within me. So I didn't.
Was that an immediate thing, or was that kind of gradual as that you kind of came out? Or?
It was, again, that first week was really rough, but it was probably that second week where I was more recovered and not quite as horrible as I was that first week. So it was definitely when I was like moving around and getting out of bed and kind of making progress because, each day was a little bit better and a little bit better. And then, there were many, many tears after I got out of the hospital and questioning if I would dance again and all that stuff. But I don't know. The depression is hard to explain because I still have to keep my eye on it now. Like I can go through periods where I get depressed. I think it does run in my family to some degree. I had some other things happen to me when I was very little that I actually don't remember, but I always had this kind of suspicion about. I think those things affected maybe how I acted a little bit after it because again, it's like it makes you shrink and it makes you like not want to fight for yourself. But there's something inside of me that was like, no, I'm going to fight. I'm going to fight. I'm going to fight. God damn it. You know? And I did. I mean, I have to say, like, I feel like I'm here because I fought. And that's why I choosing survival as my title.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. So why specifically choosing? I mean, was that a choice not to? Did you really feel like that was something you were contemplating?
Yeah. Excuse me. Again, this is really, I know people have their beliefs that are very like close to their heart, but this experience basically made me realize or feel very strongly that I had a choice that night. I had a choice to live or I had a choice to die. And I do think that I would have been helped either way. But it was ultimately my choice. Like, obviously I needed help. I needed to get to the hospital, right? The doctors saved my life. Like, I don't want to imply that either. Like, I did everything by myself. That's not what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, of course not.
But, I definitely do think that, yeah, I had a choice. And I think that all of us have more choices than maybe we're aware of. Mine was very obvious, you know, but I think other people, it can happen like, oh, I'm going to turn right instead of left. And somehow maybe it's your higher self or some of your subconscious, you have this feeling or this awareness that if I go that way, time out. You know, if we're going this way, then we're going to keep going. I don't, it's hard for me, again, to describe, but that is the best way that I can describe it. It's like, yeah, I do believe that.
I mean, it kind of reminds me of the stories of people who jump off of bridges and the people who they survive. And almost universally, they all say they regretted it the second they started jumping.
Right.
Not when they hit the ground.
Right.
But, which would make a lot of sense.
Right.
But no, in flight. And in that moment when you're stabbed and you're sitting there and you get to make that just choice. I could just lay here.
Just be like, bye.
Yeah, and just peace out.
Yeah.
Right. But you definitely chose the alternative. You were, and I am going to save myself. And if my mom's not going to do it, I'm going to do it myself. I mean, that's, I think that's deeply innate and built into people once they're sort of put in that position.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, it's like you always like, I never knew what I was capable of until, and I would rather have not gone through this. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry. But, you know, I did, and I'm just going to push through. And that's kind of how I've been my whole life. I'm like, well, all right, I'm just going to figure it out. I'm going to keep going. Like, there's just always been this something about me that will just, all right, I don't know. I'm going to keep going. I'm going to fight. I'm going to figure this out. And I will say, like, going back to when you asked me earlier about how could someone think you stabbed yourself in the back.
Yeah.
This reminded me of this. My dad, I told my dad, like, after the psychiatrist interviewed me, I'm like, I don't want to see him. I don't want him to come in my room again. Like, I don't want anything to do with this person. Like, please don't let him in here, because you are so vulnerable. Like, you have no say in anything. Like, what happens? Like, people come in and out, they poke you and prod you, and then you got to do this and that. But my dad apparently went to the psychiatrist and was like, what do you think my daughter's triple jointed? Like, she's right-handed. She was stabbed on the left side of her back. Like, hello? And the psychiatrist literally, again, according to my dad, was like, oh, she was? I didn't know that. Like, did you not read the thing? And then,
well, that would at least explain it. I mean, that would at least, okay.
Yeah, a little bit, but
that guy, yeah, I know. No, I mean, there's a difference between being very bad at your job and being very bad at your job.
Right.
You know,
right.
But the cops, on the other hand, they also were not particularly, like, that's a different story. Like,
yes.
they're on my naughty list.
Yeah.
Well, that's not good. And also, where would the knife have gone exactly?
Yeah.
I mean, were you just
felt that way too. Like, did I swallow it? What happened?
Or did you walk around with it and not bleed and throw it away without bleeding to the trash can or wherever? Like,
yeah. And I don't know if they went through the trash. I have no idea. But my mom, like, showed them the knives. Like, she's like, here they are. You know, I mean, it's not this impressive knife. She's not a chef. So, you know, there were no missing knives, at least from what, you know, she had the little block with all the knives in it. And, but yeah, I just thought that was so stupid. I was like, what are you talking about?
Just carry a chef knife with me just in case I need to stab myself in the back.
Right. And the leg and the face and the hand, you know, I mean, like, and that's the other thing too. I was like, I understand how you would do this if you were choosing to end your life. Sure. This is not it.
Right.
I'm well
There's
aware.
some very specific cuts that you would make.
And that's so morbid, but it's true. And I'm just looking at them like, what are you talking? Like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
You know, and the other thing I will say, my dad talked to the ER surgeon, and he was like, and again, it's just weird to feel these little moments of validation, because he even said to my father, is like, she is here because she fought to be here. Like, and that's coming from the surgeon who again, saved my life. But he was like, she is here because she chose to be here. And that's always stayed with me too. Because again, I believe it in my soul, and then to hear someone else who was there with me that night.
It's nice to hear it.
Yeah.
Okay, so after the physical process was over of healing, which I'm sure took a lot longer than just a couple of weeks. Even.
Yeah.
But let's say the bulk of the hard work there had been kind of in your rearview mirror. Mm-hmm. What was the next phase of kind of learning how to get past this? Like, how'd you reconcile the fact that you didn't know where this person was and they could come back theoretically?
Right.
How'd you reconcile the fact that who knows what the original motive was? How did you kind of deal with all that?
I will say it's somewhat still ongoing all these years later. I'm so sorry. I definitely was kind of obsessed with the why. I wanted to know why. And I had to at some point, and there's not a pinpoint, like on this date, I decided. It's just, I had to let that go because there was no why. I was never going to know. I was never going to figure it out. And I had to somehow reconcile that. And I think that alone really helped me. I did, I went back to college. So this happened to me in May. I went back to college in August. And today I'm like,
it's not very much time.
No, I'm like, damn, that's crazy. but that's what I did. I was like,
but maybe it was the right choice.
I think it was.
Get your head back in the game.
Yeah. I was like, well, I don't want to be, and that was part of it though. I didn't want to be home. Yeah. And I still feel this little bit of guilt leaving my mom. So basically what happened is I was, this wonderful like alarm company donated an alarm system for us, which was amazing. We slept with all the lights on. And the first day that she went back to work for the whole day, I was on the phone with her and this call waiting came in. So again, for these kids today. So it's a landline. And I clicked over and this man's voice was kind of like, hello, is Patricia there? And I was like, and I was always taught to say like, they're not available. Mm-hmm. May I take a message? And for some reason I didn't say, may I take a message? Because something, I just felt a little bit like, I don't know. There was something a little bit like, my spidey, what is it? The spidey senses were tingling. And I was like, well, she's not available. And he was like, well, is this Lynn? And I was like, yes. And I remember this conversation again, like it's etched in my brain. And he was like, well, how are you doing? And I was like, fine. And even now, I don't know why I kept hesitating. Cause I think it was very quickly dawning on me, like who this was, but it's kind of unbelievable. And I just, I was kind of in shock a little bit. And he asked me, what have the police done for you? And at this point, I'm like thinking like, what the fuck? Oh my God, in my brain. And I'm like, I haven't talked to them, and I can't even explain like why I answered the way I did. I just did. And then he started asking me, why did you start screaming?
Wow.
And I was like, finally, I was like, who the fuck is this? And he's like, why did you start screaming? I was like, the fuck is this? And he's like, why did you start screaming? I mean, he just kept getting angrier and angrier. And I was like, oh, fuck it. And I'm screaming at this point, and I'm just like, oh my God. And I was so terrified. I mean, I was more terrified then than I was probably getting stabbed, because at that point is he across the street? Is he in my home? Is he, I don't know where he is, but this is obviously who this is, because again, people thought, oh, he's playing a prank, or it turned into, well, you must know him. You had to have known him. How did he have your number? And I'm like, well, there's this thing called a phone book, and there's 2 Forneys in it. And he knows my address because every Florida paper in the South has printed my address. They printed my name.
And he was there.
Right. So I'm like, this isn't like master deduction skills that you need to get my number, and I was literally shaking. I was so terrified. And I remember clicking back over to my mother and I'm like, he called me, this man's called me. And I ended up calling 911, and I was like, I'm the girl that got stabbed. I mean, I just didn't even know what to say. And I'm like, my mom has a gun. I was so just terrified. And I think that was the moment that I was like, I cannot stay here.
And so what happened? They just didn't follow up, or he was calling from a payphone, or
probably a payphone. There's no way to trace the call, I guess, back, because they weren't tracing it actively. But I know, wow. Is there a way to do this with records? I don't know, but they did put a phone tap on it. But he never called again that I knew of. And again, I did feel guilty leaving my mom. But I was like, I can't heal and stay here. And that was it. Like I had to go. And so I ended up going to like the Tampa area to live with my father for the rest of the summer.
Wow. Well, no kidding. Of course.
Yeah. It was just so fucked up. And again, like, there's people like, we're just kept insisting that I must know him, or my mom knows him. Like one of us knows him. And I'm like, no, we don't know this dude. Like, don't know him. And so that was just another thing of just constantly being not believed or being questioned, or, it's like, dude, like I've already been through enough, and I don't need you now making me feel like an asshole,
Well, at minimum, now you know, even if it wasn't premeditated, which it definitely was, for sure, definitely that follow-up phone call was 100% premeditated.
Oh, yeah.
So,
and again, I questioned that. I was like, what the fuck was that about? And I think he was pissed, that I lived or I was screaming. I don't know. And, the best I can think of is my mom's house is very close to the mall and the drugstore that we worked at, or that I worked at, and, or went to, whatever. And so if someone was following me, especially when I was 21, I would not have noticed in that, I don't know, quarter of a mile distance. And I think he saw me at one of those two places and followed me home.
How long had you been going back and forth since you got back?
I got there on a Wednesday, and this happened to me like Friday, Saturday morning technically.
Wow, so it's fast.
So I had gone to...
It's not like you had a big pattern where you were doing this for months or something.
So, and again, as these people do this more and more and more, they, at least what I understand is, the first crime, there's a very long period of time between the first and the second, and then, but as they keep going, it gets shorter and shorter. So for me, I'm going to guess, I don't really know. I mean, I probably on a Thursday he saw me, and then he was, watching the house, and then he knew because he probably knew my mom was gone. All these things, like he was an expert at what he did. Wow. Essentially.
Did he even have a job? I mean, how much time did he have to spend to do
I know.
all this?
I know. I don't think so. I think he lived, with his parents. Had his parents' money.
Wow.
As far as I know, whatever.
Yeah. Wow. I just purely out of curiosity, do you enjoy watching like murder mysteries and very kind of salacious crime thriller type?
It depends.
Shows?
Honestly, what I like more are cult shows, surprisingly, because there's something about like sociology that I find so fascinating. Crime shows are a bit harder for me. Like I will not watch like the Bundy show and things like that. So typically no, I will say no. And if there's like stabbing scenes, like I just kind of have to like, even now, like I can't look at it or even hear it. Like my husband's really sweet. He'll be like, don't look, and he'll mute it. Because that's really tough for me to watch. But I mean, I'll still watch like a horror movie. I like psychological horror movies, but yeah, I'm going to say no. I typically just avoid the...
Interesting.
Yeah.
And could you watch them before? Do you feel like that's changed?
It was never like my cup of tea.
Yeah, I know. But
probably, yeah. I don't think I would have had I don't think I would have been like as affected as I am now. But again, there's something about, the psychology of it and the sociology is very fascinating to me. But again, I'm just like, I can't.
Okay, so back to my original question here. I went way afield there, but it was interesting. It was interesting. It was worth doing. So after you're kind of feeling better and things are kind of calming down a little bit, like what was the sort of mental process you went through to kind of decide like, yeah, I'm sorry.
No, it was me. I think I'm like, that was probably my fault.
No, I think we both contributed. So like, was it talk therapy? Was it just journaling? Like, what did you do to kind of get over it?
So I went to school that August, and I think I was just so focused on like, I will not allow this man to take over my life. I'm just not going to do it. And I, went back to class, and I think that was the year I like took my math courses or whatever I needed to take, because I couldn't really dance. I did take a couple dance classes. I had this brace on my leg for a year, close to it, and but I remember taking a couple as best I could in that leg brace. But that was kind of got some of my core classes out of the way that year. But it was hard. I mean, I definitely I do remember at one point I was in a math class, and they always have like the when they break you up into smaller groups and you have like a TA, and I do remember hearing that I think they thought they'd caught him. Something, I can't even remember what it was, but I do remember telling him like, I think I need to go home, and I'm not going to be here for this weekend. Like, I don't, so there were things where I definitely had a difficult time.
Plus you must've had to explain it to everybody. Everyone wants to know why you're passed.
Right. Cause I'm like, some, young girl or whatever. And, I also I can't remember what it's called, but in college, you can basically make it look like you don't exist. There's some list you can get yourself on that somebody told me about, because I was terrified of this dude finding me. Because again, the papers had like, I put that I was a University of Florida student, and this is my mom's full name and my full name. My address. It was just horrible. So that made me again feel so completely vulnerable. And so I put myself on this list where if someone called, like if you were trying to verify I was a student there, they would say no. So there was no way to like have me there. I was not on a record anywhere for anyone publicly calling in to find out if I existed, if I went there, like nothing. And so I did that. And here's one example of how so I was living in this house this one year, and that would have been the year after I got stabbed. So somebody had left the back door open. I'm like, I just went into like, I was terrified. And I remember calling my friend and I was like, please don't hang up. Please stay with me on the phone. And I was like glued to the wall and I was trying to like slide up the wall to like get into my room because I was just so paranoid. And so like, and now I understand that that's like a very normal response for someone. Like you need your back against the wall because you know that nothing's going to come from behind. But I was just shaking and I was just terrified, you know, so I had these moments of like stuff like that would happen. But I had a talk therapist, and then I didn't for a little while. I, again, was so focused on dance, you know, that I was just like, I'm going to take my classes. I'm going to try to just live my life as normally as I can. There were times where I definitely probably should have been medicated or with a therapist that I wasn't. It's just this windy road. I mean, healing is not a straight line.
I was going to say, it typically comes back and bites you later if you don't deal with it.
Right. It always does. I wouldn't say typically. I say it definitely will, 100%. And so, yeah, and that's kind of always my way of like, I'm going to shove it down. I don't need to deal with that. It's over there. I'm just going to put it over there and we're just going to keep on going, you know? And I think dance is hugely expressive for me. So I think, you know, kind of processing it in that way, having supportive friends. But again, like no one knows. I've had people literally now write me and say and apologize for feeling like they weren't a good friend to me at that point.
Yeah. What? Yeah. Why?
Which really breaks my heart because they just we were so young, you know. And
but what did they do?
They just felt like they weren't there for me enough. They didn't help me enough, or they didn't support me enough. Like that was just their way. They just felt like I didn't. You know, I don't know. Like I didn't. I was unaware of this, but I guess they just felt like they weren't there for me or a good enough friend. And I was like, well, of course, like. I don't know how I'd react to someone, you know, what do you do? And everyone's got to live their own life. And I understand that too. But,
so you didn't felt like you weren't taken care of by your friends and family?
I didn't feel necessarily that way. You know, I think when I asked for support or someone to hang out with, or, you know, again, I'm not one to like ask for help or feel sorry for myself. I just, you know, I'm going to choreograph this dance and now I have to do this homework or whatever, you know. I just kind of kept trying to do my day by day. And so sometimes I think I probably struggled more than other people could see. But you know, again, I don't know. I really worked on just trying to live my life. And then, I will say years later about 12 years later or so, I ended up moving to Jackson, Mississippi with my husband who ironically, or I don't know what the right word, that's not the right word, but we started dating like maybe 9 months after I got attacked. And the only reason that I think I dated him is because he was a friend of my brother's and they were fraternity brothers. And I'd never had a boyfriend up to this point. Okay. Like, I don't know. I was like,
first boyfriend.
It was that I ended
romantic.
I know that he had to deal with this poor girl who's like been like stabbed and shit. But, but he really made me feel safe. And I had never felt that really with a boy. And I think that's why.
Was that hard to kind of give up and trust somebody for the first time after such a traumatic thing? Were you reluctant to do that?
Yeah, to some degree. And I think that had my brother had not had that relationship with him, I don't know that I would have. I think it's because I trust my brother's judgment and I know he's not going to let me be around someone who he wouldn't trust. And I will say that we didn't tell my brother for a few months because we knew it would be weird.
Really?
Yeah. And his name's Lucas. He went to school at UCF, which is about 2 hours away. So it's kind of easy to be like, we'll just hang. So my brother got married and that's how like we kind of hooked up at the
I see.
You know, we kissed or whatever. But you know, and then we had this very awkward like phone thing for a little while. But I just knew like my brother, you know, I just trusted his judgment enough to kind of like, okay, maybe I'll see where this is going. But it was very quickly, I felt very safe with him. And I had met him before I got stabbed too. Like we had all gone to Disney World. Like my brother and Lucas and this other guy, Boomer, like we all went to Disney. So I'd met him a few times and hung out with him. So it wasn't just like I randomly met him out of nowhere. So we had a little bit of a, you know, rapport before, you know, we went there. But yeah, I mean, it wasn't because I also really wanted a boyfriend. You know, I wanted like to be normal. Like I wanted a normal experience. Like I wanted to, you know, like everybody else. So, you know, but again, there were times where I do remember one time, like I think he was sleeping, like he just kind of elbowed me right in my stab wound. And I almost like fell out of bed. I was just like, my whole body just jerked and, you know, and I just kind of like was shaking. You know, I think of these experiences back then. I didn't really know what it was, but I do remember feeling like, you know, and just kind of having these, I was just like trembling in bed and I think he was sleeping through the whole thing, but I was just like awake for hours after that, just terrified. You know, and Anyway, circling back, I do have ADHD, and I talked about that
That's
too.
okay. That's okay.
I'm like squirrels and jazz dance. But I went to, so in Jackson, Mississippi, I went to this trauma specialist. So I ended up I taught Pilates for a very long time, and I talked to the woman that owned the studio, and she had been through quite a bit of trauma herself. And she said, I've been through this therapist. She's wonderful. And I think that was really when I was ready to finally just say, look, I am going to come here and I'm going to let it all hang out, for lack of a better phrase. And I just don't want to be, I remember telling her, I don't want to be 85 with the same issues. Like, I want to heal from this, because I knew, like, I was very jumpy. Like, for instance, like, I knew it was my husband getting home. I knew it was him, and he would turn the corner and I would just do this, and my feet would come off the ground. So things like that I was finally recognizing, like, okay, I don't think this is like average behavior. I would also dissociate, which I didn't really realize I was doing that. Like, I'd be in a dance class and I would just be like, oh, I'm back. I don't know where I went, for a couple seconds. It's not long, but it's like, I would be like, oh, a fire could have erupted to my face. And I would have had no idea in those 2 to 3 seconds.
And where were you?
I don't know.
Just thinking?
It's weird. If you don't experience it, you just go somewhere. I don't know where you go, but you're not here. I mean, it is bizarre. But I also experience, I would feel like I was sleeping in bed, but I would feel my body against the mattress, but I'd also feel like I was floating above my body. Or if I started talking about things that made me uncomfortable, like my head would suddenly feel like a balloon, like it was kind of floating, and I didn't understand what that was until someone explained it to me. Like, dissociation, not to the point where I'm like a whole nother person, but kind of pulling out of your body. But that happened to me often. Like, I was just kind of never fully 100% present. And so I did this therapy with her called EMDR, which I also have a whole chapter about.
I've heard about this.
Yeah. It's wild.
Yeah. Tell us about it.
So, it is, I like to talk about it through like how I experienced it, but it's essentially, the way my therapist very plainly described it to me is, when you experience trauma, there's kind of a loop that needs to happen in your brain. And what happens when you're traumatized is it stops. And then you're kind of constantly stopping at that point, and you never fully get to that full loop. So this is a way to not only connect your right and left hemispheres of your brain, it's a way to get your subconscious more on board and more present, so that you can kind of work through these things that are kind of hanging out in your subconscious, because normally we're not really aware of what's going on in there. And so normally you do this rapid eye movement, and I kind of told her when we started, I was like, this is making me really nauseous. Like, I can't do this. So she had me close my eyes, and she would tap my legs, and I would have all these crazy feelings through my body. Like, I would feel like, Alice in Wonderland, like I would stretch and then I would shrink. And then I would feel like my legs were 600-pound lead weights, like stuck to the chair. But then I would get that weird floaty feeling, just all these weird like body feelings throughout this. But they kind of have you get relaxed, and kind of go on a journey. Like, she had me like get on a boat, and then you're traveling to this house, and it's your safe house. And then she would kind of have you describe it. So you're sort of getting into a meditative state. You're not asleep. You're not being hypnotized. Like, you're present, but it's more of a relaxed state. And again, trying to get your subconscious to kind of be more in front, kind of the driver's seat. And she took me in, like, later on, she kind of like, once you're establishing feeling safe, and this is months into us working together, by the way, like, sure, you don't just jump in and be like, let's do this EMDR, because I really had to trust her. And so she had me kind of go into this cave, and at one point try to look at a TV screen, and I could not see anything. And so like we kind of kept going to, again, try to see what I could come up with. And what ended up coming up in that, surprisingly, was something that I do think happened to me in childhood. And so I'm like going even further beyond this like stabbing thing to like something that happened to me way younger, and kind of working through that.
Do you feel comfortable telling us what that is?
Sure. This is where it gets a little tricky, because again, with all the shaming I felt, like I still can't remember this fully. This is not like a movie where I can remember getting stabbed. But like I said, I always had this sneaking suspicion somewhere that I'd gotten molested when I was young. And so how I can describe it is, so she's taking me on this journey. I'm in this cave. I'm trying to like come up with, I don't know, some answers to like, why I'm experiencing these traumatic, responses. And something also happened to me when I was about 5, where this kid who was a little bit older than me would like convince me to take my clothes off and like do things that like basically told me that he knew what sex was. I had no idea what it was. And I was trying to work through that actually with her. And then I was like, I think this is something else. Like, there's something else under that. And I don't know what this is yet, but it just feels like something different. And one of the first things I came to, and so it's hard for me to remember exactly because I did so many sessions, but one of the things I wrote about was seeing this younger version of myself. So I'm in these woods, and I kind of see this little girl peeking out from behind a tree, and she was covered in like leaves and dirt, and she had this cheerleading uniform on because I was a cheerleader when I was 3 through 5 for my brother's little league team. And it was one of my cheerleading uniforms. So I'm quickly realizing this is a version of me. This is like my 4-year-old, because it's the outfit I wore when I was 4. I don't have a lot of memory of my when being 4. And she was holding this little stuffed bunny that I still have today that I used to carry around with me a lot. And she just looked so alone and sad. Like this makes me like really emotional. And it's okay. I don't mind talking about it, but it'll still get me because it was just so heartbreaking. And in some way I felt like I did this to her. Like she's been alone like this because of me. And, so I had to like very slowly kind of approach her to kind of earn her trust to then sort of tell me what happened to her. Because again, the person that I am today can't remember. And so I was having to kind of help me remember. And I do remember kind of the next thing I saw was her in this room. And because the therapist kind of had me, let her guide me. So like she has me by the hand, and I'm letting her just kind of take me and show me whatever she needs to show me. And so like we're in this room together, and the next thing I saw her was on a table. And the next thing I felt like I was a mist on the room, on the ceiling with like 2 eyeballs. So I'm literally like, just like, I felt like I was a mist. I'm looking down at this little version of me on this table, and this shadowy figure came up to her with these like yellow eyes and kind of like these clawed hands, because again, this is all in my subconscious. And I never got a full like detailed movie, if you will, of what happened, but I think it was pretty bad. And I think it was maybe like a friend of my parents that I was probably at their house, maybe, something like that, where they took me, from the practice to, and I was at his house for a little while. And I don't know how many times it happened. I didn't try to figure all that out, but it just felt surreal. And at first, like, I was kind of coming out of it, I'm like, I literally questioned, like, is this real? Am I making this up? Am I trying to figure out why I've been depressed all this year? What is this? And she kind of was very gentle with me, and she was like, I think we need to keep exploring this. And so like, I just kind of had the same experience, and she assured me, this is very reminiscent of other patients I have of going through something really traumatic when they were very little and not being able to remember it. Like they had the same exact, like they were the mist on the ceiling with some eyes. It was either that or one other version of a full dissociation where you just leave. And that's what I can remember the best, honestly, of the EMDR, not even the experience of trying to get the help through getting stabbed. That was it.
Do you have any sense of who that person actually was for reals? As if you could actually call your mom and say, hey, did somebody pick me up from practice sometimes or anything like that?
I tried to ask her about the little boy that was, because I remember he lived across the street. He was blonde. Like I definitely remember this, and I didn't remember it for years. And I remember one day just suddenly, it was like oh my God, that kid molested me. It was just this weird, like sudden realization that like, just kind of like remembering all these things that he did and would convince me to do. And I always felt bad and dirty. But I think having that experience at 4 kind of set me up for this kid to be able to kind of manipulate me. And it's really shameful. Like I do remember just kind of always feeling bad about myself or feeling gross or like not feeling good enough. I mean, it affects so much of your self-worth and your self-esteem. And, but I do remember asking her about him. I was like, do you remember, and kind of just doing it conversation. Like, do you happen to remember this kid that I used to play with, and he lived across the street, and his mom had like brown curly hair, and she like had no idea who I was talking about, and I remember distinctly watching his family, because they moved a little bit. I was living in Atlanta at the time, and his family moved a little bit before me. And I can remember distinctly feeling relief. Just standing in our driveway, watching them drive away, like everybody, in the neighbor, like the little neighbor, we were all watching this and just thinking, thank God, I'm so happy. I mean, as a 5-year-old thinking, thank God he's gone. And I was just relieved, just this relief was all over me. But I just kind of figured, if she doesn't remember that kid that I played with a decent amount, I don't think she's going to remember, like have any recollection of me going to anybody's house or whatever. So I haven't asked, because she has no idea. She still hasn't read my book. So she has no idea that this stuff I'm assuming happened. I never talked, because that was another thing I asked my therapist, because she was like, something didn't make you feel safe enough to talk to them about it. Because I was like, wouldn't they have known? And she's like, there's usually something. There's some tell where you're either uncomfortable or there's some kind of behavioral change that will it can be very subtle, but she's like, usually there's something that they should have been able to pick up on. Not shaming them, but because I have no answers for that. I'm a little kid.
Well, the really sad thing is that boy probably was molested as well.
Absolutely, and I thought that too, and I thought about that, and she, and she did a good job of like, you're allowed to feel sorry for him, but to heal from this, you cannot feel sorry. It's kind of, you have to separate.
Understood. But boy.
Yeah.
So after EMDR, did you feel some sort of relief? Was that?
Yeah, that's it. It kind of feels like your brains are being like thrown and scattered all over the place, and you're like slowly trying to put them all together. And so that was about a year-long process of going through that. And but I definitely felt more whole. I felt more present. It's hard to describe, and she even said it. She's like, I can see that your eyes are more bright. They're just, and I didn't dissociate as much. Mm-hmm. And just even understanding, like, there's something called, like, when you experience an ego state, right? This is something else she taught me about. So if let's say someone says something to you right now, and you immediately feel like you're 12, and you react like you did when you were 12. What's happening to you or to your subconscious or your body is that you are experiencing exactly whatever happened to you when you were 12. You may not be aware of it. You don't think that's what's happening to you, but there's this, so you kind of shift into the ego state that you were in when that experience happened to you. So until you kind of clear that trauma that happened to you when you were 12, that thing will keep happening. So even just knowing that, like, because I can literally pinpoint, oh, that was my 21-year-old coming out. Oh, that was my 4-year-old. This was, because you can
I don't
literally
even like Malibu anymore.
Actually, I do. People make fun of me for it, but you know what I mean? It's like, it's so, I know most people do. It's okay. But it's a fascinating thing to be more aware of that kind of thing. And so when you have this awareness over it, you can recognize it's happening, and then kind of, okay, now my adult's going to come in and be like, we have this, we're going to take care of this, but it's like, so just having that knowledge and doing all that healing it just made me so much more self-aware. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's wild. Like, I
have heard a very similar story about someone who did EMDR, was also a woman, and she said it was an event that she couldn't even fully remember. Very kind of similar situation to you, but very, very traumatic. So she remembered parts of it. It wasn't a stabbing, but
sure.
a lot of bad things happened. And after it was over, she's like, I had the worst nightmares like ever of my entire life. It was horrible after the first time doing it. Like really, really terrible, awful sensation. And then the following day, she had the best sleep she's ever had, and she was completely okay, like as if it was just gone.
Yeah.
And that seems unlikely if it's not absolutely true. It just,
right.
That doesn't seem psychosomatic.
Right. I don't know.
Something happening there.
And that's great. And some people it doesn't work for as well. It's still considered a controversial therapy, which kind of surprised me, I guess. But I found it to be incredibly healing, but incredibly difficult. Like, you don't walk into that without knowing, like, this is a long process, and like, I'm just going to have to keep going. And I do remember my therapist at one point just kind of looking at me and be like, do you have any thoughts or feelings about possibly just kind of moving somewhere, anywhere, and, taking on a new name? And I was like, yeah. That sounds great. And she was like, okay. She's like, that's very normal. I just want you to know that's very normal at this stage, like where we're at. I can't tell you to do that or not, like very therapy thing, but I'm just like, she's like, I'm just going to let you know that that's very normal. I would advise to kind of stick with this, even though I know it's difficult, but if, because she had one lady, I guess, up and move to Seattle and take on a new name. Like it's, you can literally do it. But I was like, yeah, no, like I do my whole life. I'm just gonna stick with it, but it was so funny because I never said that to her, but she just kind of asked me, and I was like, oh my God, yeah, I want to move to like Amsterdam, and I don't know, like meet somebody else, which sometimes I still feel that way, but yeah, it's a really wild experience. And again, it's gonna be different for everybody, but that's kind of how it was my experience.
So after EMDR, was that your sort of last big phase of dealing with it, would you say? Or
it was definitely the biggest. Okay. The next time that I had something, because for a while, I'm like, oh, okay, I can definitely sense a shift. She was just an amazing therapist too. Like I would say the best one I've ever had, not to like diss any of the other ones I've had, but I just learned to communicate better with, Lucas, and like, I don't know, it was just a lot of things changed for me, but it was a kind of a tumultuous year too of trying to like kind of, heal myself, if you will. But a few years later we moved to New Orleans, and I was driving to like dance rehearsal, and these men were in the road. They were like literally in the road. One was on the ground, and these other two men were punching him. And I just, and I'm on a one lane, like a single one way only street that there's very little way to leave the situation. And at first I was like, oh my God, like, do I call the police? Do I get on help? I don't know, like kind of what to do. And I'm just like, and I could feel myself starting to then like try to find my outs. Like, okay, I can maybe jump this curb. Like, am I going to hit anybody? Like, I can't back up because there's a person behind me. Like, what, and it's kind of starting to like plan, like, what am I doing? Because what I've noticed, and this has been true my whole life, in the moment, I'm really on top of my shit. Like, do this, you do this. I'm telling my mom to call 911, right? And telling like people like, this is my blood type, like it's after the fact that I'll lose it. But they literally just looked at me and got up. And then just like, so I was like, well, I guess I broke the fight up. I don't know, you know what I mean? It was just such a sad situation. These grown men, like 40s and up, like in the middle of the road. And the police in New Orleans, a whole nother thing. But I'm like, okay, I guess I'll go. But then I started feeling guilty. Like, should I have called someone? Should I have stepped, and then feeling like I should have done something more. And I even like made a loop to see if they were gone, but then not wanting to get involved. Is that of kind of self-preservation too. And I ended up getting to rehearsal, and I started telling people, I'm like, God, these guys were in the road and I don't know. And then I could kind of just started feeling this inward shaking kind of happening. And I was kind of crying, and understandably other people were like, oh, that sucks. But it's kind of this weird, like, but, I think you did the right thing. It's okay. And I just suddenly was like, I looked at the director, and I just looked at her and said, I need to go to the bathroom. Like, I am. And she did know what had happened to me. Like, she knew I was had been stabbed at one point. And I was like, I don't know what this is, but I need to go to the bathroom. And I was just like shaking, and I had to again put my back up against the wall in the corner in this gross stall, and just like I slid to the floor, and I was literally just shaking and rocking and sobbing for an hour. A full-on hour. I could not control what my body was doing, what was happening, even though logically I completely understood. Like, I am in the bathroom. I am safe. I'm hearing the class go on without me. I'm hearing the music. Like, all of that was very well known to me, but I could not control or calm myself at all. And I called my husband, and he just kind of stayed on the phone with me for an hour. And I'm like, I don't know what's going on. And I had never experienced that level of, a trigger. And, that was shocking and kind of disappointing. I'm going to be honest and say it was embarrassing, because I just was like, these people must be wondering what the fuck's wrong with this chick. Like, it was just for the people that didn't kind of know, and even if you've heard someone stabbed, they don't understand the full depth of it. Yeah. And so I felt kind of humiliated, and it was really surprising, because I'm like, oh, I've done all this work. Like, why is this happening now? I mean, we're talking like 20 years later. And so it's just another example of, this is not a straight line. It's not, easy A, B, C. It's, you just kind of, and I've done a lot of work, and so I was like, oh my God, and disappointing, I guess. I'm like, why am I here right now if I've done all this work? And I, again, it's, what do you do with this? And I had a few more instances that were not nearly that severe, but that kind of the same thing happened, where I would just kind of shake and cry. And I just had like these moments of trying to calm myself as best I could. And how I dealt with that, I did go to a psychiatrist, but I also choreographed a dance based on PTSD, because I'm like, well, this is my mode of communication. And we were doing a show called The Elephants that was all about like things that aren't talked about, like the elephants in the room. And I had known, like, I'd seen in my mind's eye for years that I kind of wanted to do this. I'm very visual, and so I'll create things in my mind. And so I just kind of knew, I sort of had this outline of this dance I've been wanting to do for a long time. And I started to work on it for this show, thinking it would be more about body issues, like body image things, and kind of not feeling that was the right way to go. And then it just sort of hit me. I was like, oh my God, this needs to be about PTSD. Like, that's what this needs to be about. And that's and it kind of quickly, I got it choreographed like in, like 2 rehearsals for myself. Cause it just kind of poured out, and I got to perform it like twice that year. And that was a really powerful way to kind of move through that experience. And, I still can't answer why, like, it happened because, but, in some weird way, it was a gift in a sense that hopefully I could take that experience and hope I helped someone else through something similar. You know, it wasn't like millions of people saw it, but if I was able to connect with even one person, you know, that's the point, right? Of art to me, it's like trying to make those connections and explain things that are kind of unexplainable and help people connect in that way.
So how do you tell people this in situations like this? Obviously we're talking about, this is the point of what we're talking about, but let's say you're at work or, you know, hanging out with a friend who just kind of met, like, how do you even have that conversation? Or do you just try to avoid it? Or
you know, some people have known me for years and never knew this happened. Whereas other people, you know how some people just have that thing about them where you just start telling them stuff, and then other people, sometimes it comes up in conversation. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it's like, I feel this need to tell you why I've maybe acted weird. You know, if I've you know, like, okay, just so you know, it's always a little bit different. And, I used to I still do have a inappropriate laugh response. So I'd be like, I was stabbed. Ha! You know, it's like this weird, like, you know, and people are like, what the fuck? And so, you know, it's like, oh my God, I know, it's so weird, right? So like I've had to like get more comfortable talking about it. And, but that was typically my way. It's just like kind of embarrassing now, but
where they probably aren't even sure if you're serious or not.
Yeah,
like it might not even have actually happened. Like,
right?
I got stabbed. Ha ha ha! Like, oh yeah, what is that? What?
Right.
Is that
and like,
real?
Right? Yeah. And who the hell would joke about that? Like,
Right.
I think nobody took it as me joking, but there was this like, oh my God, and what is it? You know, and
because I bet you could come up with 100 really good jokes to inappropriately use at these situations.
1,000, 1,000,000. But yeah, it was just because and I never understood that response for a long time too. And I'm like, it's my anxiety. Oh, okay, hello. But it was because it's such a weird thing to say or tell someone, you know, and it's kind of, I don't know. Yeah, it varies. To answer your question simply.
Well, how about with your current husband? How did you explain to him?
He knew because he was friends with my brother. In fact,
he found out through the brother. Yeah,
my brother was supposed to go to a party at his house that night, and so because Lucas remembers telling me, like he ended up calling him saying, "Hey man, like I can't come over," this, and kind of explaining it to him, and he said he threw the phone across the yard, like because he was on a cordless phone, and we didn't know each other well at that point, but here's someone that he really cares about, and it's his family member, and so he already knew. So, I mean, it was obviously like I had to tell him more things about it. And he's always been one to try to let me tell him or talk about it. But sometimes it's, you know, like, and because that's how I was raised, like his family, they just don't talk about their feelings or whatever. But sometimes I'm like, I would like to be asked. It'd be nice. Yeah. You know, it's, I mean, but I get it. It's uncomfortable and it's hard and it's, because some people don't want to talk about it. Right. So I totally get that.
Yeah. So how do you think, when you're telling people this, are you worried that it's going to color how they see you, or so you just don't bring it up? Or do you feel like, it's just like where I grew up. It's just another part of my life it might come up in conversation. It might not. Like how do you feel about that?
I sort of just don't worry about it. I'm like, you know what? This is my life. And if you can't handle it, that's fine. Bye.
I mean, there's certain things about my life. If someone wants to get into it, I'll kind of like, I don't really want to talk about it. It's just take forever to explain all this detail. And it's more frustration at the complexity of the story than it is not wanting to tell them. Yeah. You know, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does.
So I don't, maybe you feel similarly.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely there's an abbreviated version, right? And there have been times now that I'm thinking about it, like someone trying to pry and say more. I'm like, oh, and it's a long story. It's just a long story. Well, what happened? Were you like mugged or, you know, just, I don't know. And I'm like, and I'm finally like, I'm stabbed. Okay, I'm stabbed. And then that really shuts somebody up real fast. So I've had those experiences too of trying to avoid it or dance around it and do it's a long story. Like, you don't want to hear it. It's long. And then other times kind of starting to get into the story more and then starting to feel really angry. You know, I can feel my anger kind of coming up. And so, because usually I'm a little bit more detached trying to tell the story or talk about it. So it's always a little bit different, but I know exactly what you're saying because it is to really, because even if people would find out I got stabbed, once they really found out all the details, they're like, oh my God, you know, and right. And so it's just in so much more to it. But I don't know. It's. I can
imagine, I'm just picturing you being at a party and telling somebody kind of sort of in person, you know, in the edge of the party. And then someone overhears it like, oh my God, what? And now you have to tell this story again. And then 3 more people are kind of walking back from the bathroom or whatever, getting chips and salsa. And they're like, wait, what? And now you end up having to tell the story like 8 times. And it's like, okay, you know, that could just get to the point where like, I don't want to do this anymore.
Yeah.
And is this a real thing that has actually happened to you?
No, I don't think so. I'm trying to think. I'm like, has it? Because either people like early on, they obviously knew because like my professors told them or whatever. It's like they already know. Like I don't have to come in and be like, guess what, everybody. And then other times I don't typically tell a group of people unless it's a small group of people that I already know. But again, even people that I've known well have kind of made me feel shitty, you know, because like
how so?
When I talk about choosing survival, like choosing life or death, the one thing that I will say, I'll joke and be like, I feel gypped because I didn't get like a full on near death experience with the tunnel and the this and the that. So I was like, I feel ripped off. But the one thing I did see was like this woman, and I kind of described this woman in white when I was being carried out on it was not a gurney. It was like literally the most flat boards because they knocked a picture off the wall when they were turning the corner and just kind of looked. And I saw this woman and I just kind of looked back because again, my focus was get me to the hospital. And later on, I asked my mom, I'm like, you were standing there, right? Like in the hallway, like in between our rooms. And she was like, no. And I was like, yeah, you were standing in the hallway. I mean, I clearly saw you because she used to wear like these white nylon gowns. And she was like, no, the police were in my room with me. They didn't let me come out. And I was like, huh. And I just kind of thought about it. I was like, oh. I was like, yeah, she had like a blue robe with the white. And then she had like dark hair. My mom's a redhead. So like dark hair to here. And then she didn't have a face. Like, that's weird. You know, it's literally how it's coming back to me. And I was like, holy shit.
I think it actually happened.
I think I saw an angel or something. You know, I still don't quite know. You know, I'm like, is a spirit? I don't know. I feel like an angel to me. And I haven't seen that since. Like, this is not something I see all the time, but I would have like, oh, you were hallucinating. You lost a bunch of blood. And this is something I don't often bring up because that's what I would get. And I'm like, I didn't see dancing hot dogs. I didn't see all this shit. I saw this one person for a brief moment. I know she was there though. I saw her plain as day. Like, I'm seeing you right now. But I didn't fixate on it or think about it because again, I'm like, just get me, you know, to the thing. And but that's another thing that made me feel like, wow, I think this, for like, you know, an angel figure was there to help me stay here or cross over. I mean, I feel that in like the depths of every cell of my body. Like that's really truly how it felt. So that's not something I go into, and I don't even know why I just brought that up. I'm already like, interesting. Why did I bring that up? Yeah, because some people are super fascinated with it, and some people are like, okay, you know,
well, I mean, I don't know if I believe or not.
Sure, you don't have to. Yeah,
but that's kind of irrelevant.
Mm-hmm.
So did that make you more religious? Or were you feel like you were already very religious before?
I'm not religious at all. Okay. I would say I'm more spiritual. Like I think there's something else after this. I'm not, I grew up, you know, going to church and things like that, but I definitely, have very different ideas of what happens and who God, like what God is or whatever. I think it's more of, but I do think there's something that we go to after this, you know, and whether, I don't know what that is exactly, but, yeah, I think if anything, it opened me up to other possibilities besides, oh, there's this man in this cloak and you know he's gonna judge you. I don't believe any of that. So like, you know, but I definitely do believe like there is something else. I mean, I have friends who are atheists. I have friends of all different beliefs, and I respect that. But it's like, but it is hard to be told by someone that you think has known you for many, many years at this point, look at you like, oh, okay, yeah, you were in a hospital in a gurney. I'm like, that's actually not where I was, nor did I say that. Thanks for listening. Yeah. You know, and so you're like, cool. So to even have people that I felt close to just kind of brush me off, you know, it makes you not want to talk, right?
That's frustrating.
Yeah.
Anybody believe that you try to hurt yourself other than the cops?
No.
None of your friends believe that?
God, no.
Line of garbage?
No. And I mean, even my friend was like, because I would get really upset about that. And, you know, my friend Justine, who I do mention by name in the book. So she, and I've known her since 7th grade. And she was like, you know, I get initially, because you had experienced these other things and been depressed, like, but then you get the facts. You very quickly, no, that's not true, you know? And so no one believed that at all. In fact, everyone, you know, horrified for me. And I had friends come and see me in the hospital. Like they drove from Gainesville to, Boca, which is a good 4 hours. But yeah, no, nobody thought that.
Got it. Good. Because that's horrible.
Yeah. I mean, they wouldn't be my friend anymore, I can tell you.
Yeah, right. Okay, so what made you decide to actually start putting pen to paper as opposed to just having this crazy story at parties with people walking by with chips?
Right,
that's just purely in my imagination.
Right, I'm like doing dancing plates. Yeah. When I would start to tell the story, like this is literally when I was 21, if I started telling more and more details, I would go like, oh my God. And I'm like, I know the story is so crazy. I should just write a book. I should just write a book one day. And I found myself saying that a lot. And I never really knew that I would do it. I didn't think I couldn't do it, but I was like, I don't know if I'll ever do it. And I'm used to being really busy. I'm a performer. I usually have like 5 different job things going on. And I think I needed to go through a certain amount of healing. This would have been a very different book 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and because I didn't want it to focus on what I didn't want it to be was, woe is me, look at me, I'm so amazing, but I really wanted to help people. I mean, I thought about why am I writing this? Like, what is the purpose? And I was working with a coach. She was my singing coach because I was like, I'm going to take singing lessons during COVID. And it was virtual. And she ended up also being kind of a life coach and trying to transition more into that. And she had this coaching group. And I told her about this and I told her about possibility. I'm kind of feeling like maybe, I don't know, this keeps coming up for me, wanting to write this book. And I'll backtrack, about 10 years before, I had a Pilates client who was a writer. She was working on her first book. And I was like, oh my God, that's so cool. I've just always thought it was so cool. And I remember at some point telling her about my story. She's like, well, maybe I'll write a book. And I remember distinctly thinking, but I want to write a book. You know what I mean? And I'm like, and so that's just always been somewhere floating in the back of my mind. And having this small container, this coaching group, I was like, I don't know, maybe this is my chance to kind of start workshopping this a little bit. And I'd written a poem that's also in my book called My Mistress. And I read it to my husband was like, you should read it. Because we used this Voxer chat. And so I read it, and the responses I got from that, one girl was crying and could really relate to it. And, and somebody else thought it was sexy. It was just so interesting to have these varying feelings or opinions or thoughts about it. And then it kind of hit me that I knew that I wanted to open this book with the chapter of me waking up on life support. And I was just kind of like, wouldn't that be interesting if I could write that from the first person perspective? I wonder if I could do that. Let me try that. And so I just started with that chapter. And again, it's a page long on, when you type it up on a computer. And so I read that to the group, and nobody except for the coach knew what had happened to me. And so again, just hearing the responses from that, and then I was like, well, maybe, let me see if I can write another, it just kind of started like that, writing a chapter at a time, and they were not in order at all. It was all over the place. And then I started working with the coach a little bit more closely to kind of, I would read her my, my chapters, and she would kind of push me to talk a little bit more. And she's like, you can always erase it, but I'm going to encourage you to be a little bit more, give a little more detail here, or write a little bit, expose yourself a bit more, because it's scary. Mm-hmm. It felt very scary and vulnerable. And again, exposing myself, here I am just being naked to everybody. And, but it was what I needed, just that extra little push to, I think you can do this. I think you can push a little bit more, and I just kind of trusted it would come together and make sense at some point. And I think it does, I hope. And that's kind of how, just kind of slowly but surely, and then very quickly kind of happened.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel like it was beneficial? I mean, do you feel like you got something out of writing it? It wasn't just for everybody else. Right.
I do. Yeah, I do. I can't even tell you exactly what that is, though, to be honest. I mean, like I said, I definitely kind of put off the hospital chapter and the chapter of writing about, the assailant. And I knew it. I'm just going to write this other thing. And I know I got to write that eventually, but those were, I remember writing, I was just, because I got to the point where I'm I just have to finish this. I did this meditation on January 1st, and I was like, I'm going to write this book. I'm going to finish this book this year. And I'd started it maybe in July, August of those very first, the poem. And I was like, I'm going to make this happen. This is happening this year. Come hell or high water, I'm doing it. Mm-hmm. And I did it. And, there is this certain putting into paper and kind of realizing everything I have been through. And it's not even everything, but it's a lot. Mm-hmm. Just I don't know. It is something really sobering about it. You're like, God, I've come through so much. Because, you know, on day-to-day basis, it's so easy to fall back into like, well, I'm not good enough. I've failed. I haven't done this or that. Or I didn't book this, or I didn't make it into this dance company. You know, just the ways you can think of as yourself as a failure. Sorry. But so it's easy for me to kind of get into that thought pattern, that not so healthy thought pattern. But then this is like, well, this is something I did, and I can hold it and I can touch it. And but it is hard for me to like really put my finger on exactly what it did. But I think I will say this, it has allowed me to feel stronger in talking about it. Like I don't feel as sheepish or embarrassed. I don't laugh about it as much. You know, I still laugh because I'm a friendly, fun person, I hope. But I don't have that same like, I'm stabbed, you know, like it's like I can just be more secure and solid when I talk about it and not feel, again, ashamed or sheepish, or, you know, and even more, it solidifies like, yeah, this is what happened to me. And I understand if it's too much for you. I'm going to love you and you can move, you know.
I mean, there is some pretty interesting research about putting pen to paper in terms, specifically if you're able to articulate the details.
Yeah.
If you can get as detailed as you possibly can. And that's the real trick, because a lot of people get stuck on the emotion. Like, I felt this way. No. But what was the grass like? What was the air like? You know, what did it smell like? And once you really get all of the senses down, and how you felt like mechanically, like where your fingers were, you know, not just like the emotional feeling, like like your entire body, all the emotion of it. It's much harder to have an emotional opinion about that if you're keeping all those things in mind at the same time. So if you can write that way with that level of, I don't know, kind of robotic way of thinking about how the event occurred, you know, as if you have like no emotions whatsoever as you're writing it, your body can't be both emotional and be thinking about all that detail at the same time. So I'm kind of curious. I've run into similar situations, not at all like that, where I had a traumatic event and I wrote down all the details, and I found it to be difficult to have the same sort of strong emotional response that someone right next to me had of the same event. Maybe I'm just more resilient than that person, but I don't think so. I think that writing is really what did it.
Yeah, I can see that being very healing.
And that's why I was kind of curious if you feel like you feel better today than you did when you started writing this in terms of pen to paper.
I think so. I mean, I definitely had a lot of worry, you know, of like, what are people going to think of me? And what if I, you know, like people going to think I'm crazy or weird?
Why are you worried about that?
I think exposing the depression and like, because how severe it was for me, the fact that, you know, I don't fully remember being molested, but kind of, you know, outing myself in that way. And, you know, because it's a fear thing, right? It's like, what are people going to think? Are they going to think I'm weird? Are they going to worry about me? Or are they going to be like, oh my God, like I can't deal with this person, or, you know, just whatever. It can be based in reality or based in just, you know, all the what ifs. And, it kind of does make me a little bit more secure of like, well, I can't control what somebody else feels, thinks, reacts, you know, and it's, all I know is what is my truth. Right. And
I got to tell you, obviously you're weird because this is a weird thing. I mean, once a weird thing happens to you, you get put into a new bucket. You know what I mean, but that doesn't, we all have weird things.
Yeah.
You know, this is just your very specific, incredibly interesting and unique weird thing.
Right.
You know?
And I am weird, and that's okay. Like
but I'm weird too. And everybody I know that I care about is weird. And otherwise I wouldn't find them interesting.
Right.
Right. So, I mean, coming out of this, you have to be kind of looking back at this whole thing. Like, you did almost die.
Yeah.
Do you wonder what your mom and friends and family's life would have been like had you made a different choice? I mean, is that part of this depression about choosing? Is that?
I don't know if it's about the depression about choosing, but I did often, especially like shortly after, right? I kind of did wonder, like, well, what would have happened if I had died? Like, would have people believed these policemen and just been like, okay, yeah, I guess she did it to herself. And that got to me. I didn't talk about it a lot, but I definitely did have those feelings of like, with my mom especially. I was like, would she have just been like, yeah, I guess, you know, because sometimes you can be convinced. It's like, you know, sometimes people are so like firm in their beliefs, but then other times over time, they're like, well, I don't know, maybe she did. Well, she was depressed, you know, those kind of things. And so I did wonder, I'm like, would they have just been like, yeah, I guess she could just try to kill herself. And she did. And, Or would anybody have fought for me? I think that's what I was wondering. Like, would anyone have fought for me? You know? And it's like, I don't know. I don't know the answer, obviously. And I'm glad that I'm here and that didn't happen. But I did have that thought of like, would anybody really have stood up for me and fought for me?
Do you think anyone would have?
I hope so.
Maybe your brother, maybe your dad. And
maybe, yeah.
Your mom obviously cared.
Yeah, I mean, they all cared about me. But, you know, it's like my mom is also a Southern woman who was just taught, you know, you're taught to be polite and not make trouble. And so would she have just been like, okay, I guess we'll just accept that, you know, I don't know. You know, it's so that was kind of, I don't know. It's again, I'm like, I know I would certainly get angry about the thought of that possibility. But again, I can't answer that question because it's not what happened. Or like what I've tried to be like finding a medium, like, hello.
Yeah, no, I'm just kind of curious about the mental state you go through.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, so I have to wonder if you also are wondering if, even if this is the guy, let's say 100%,
yeah,
because it kind of sounds like it, I think you're right,
yeah,
based on everything you just told me. Do you still have this fear that it might happen again? Are you still thinking that there might still be somebody out there, or even if it's not him, someone else might do it?
Yeah, I think that was another kind of not as strong of a fear, but a worry like, I'm putting this whole thing out there and am I going to now attract a bunch of other fucking psycho people? Like, you know what I mean? Is someone else going to be like, want to be a copycat or like do it again? Or am I, you know, because again, I just like in the hospital, I felt so exposed because again, I have no control over what people know about me, what they say about me, what they do. You know, it's like, you just feel like completely naked. Like I have no control over anything. And once I put this out there, I have no real control. It's its own thing now. And so am I setting myself for someone to come and perpetrate me or, you know, whatever the right word is. I don't know, but I kind of had to just accept that this was something I really wanted to do. And my hope is that it can help other people feel seen and feel more comfortable talking about things for their own life. And that had to outweigh any fear that I had about it.
I mean, not that I think that anyone's going to come after you. I really don't. And I certainly hope that doesn't happen. But at some level, it's got to feel like you've got to have this internal conversation. Like if I was to martyr myself by writing this book, there's still a massive amount of positive output having put this out in the world. Not that I think that's going to happen, but like, I really think that something like this, there's a lot of people they are dealing with a lot of different kinds of trauma, not necessarily the exact kind. And I'm sure some very similar type events, maybe where they did know the perpetrator, you know, maybe where it was supposedly their loved one. I got to think that this is going to be a useful tool for a lot of people.
I really hope so. I mean, that is the goal. It's really, because like, again, I struggle with that too, of like, why am I writing this? Like, and I talk about that. I'm very candid as I write what I'm feeling as I'm writing it. Like, I want to push the backspace on this right now. I don't want to expose myself here. This feels horrible, you know? And even like, you know, one of the chapters is called I'm a Fraud, you know, feeling like, who am I to be talking about this? Or who am I to be helping people? Like, I don't feel like that was so amazing. You know, it's like, are people going to think you're a fucked up bitch? You know what I mean? I don't know. But it's like, just grappling with those feelings as I'm feeling them and being willing to write. I mean, there's a lot of people that, you know, vulnerability I think you have to be incredibly strong to be willing to be vulnerable, right? Of course. You have to be incredibly strong to go through therapy. You know, back when I was young, it's like, oh, you're crazy. Oh, only crazy people go to therapy, right? I'm sure you heard that. I'm sure you experienced that, right? And it's so sad to me. And that has changed. And that's been an amazing thing to watch. I think we still have a long way to go. But it's kind of like, where was I going?
I'll go one better. I think everyone I know should probably be in therapy.
Oh my God, I totally agree, 100%. I'm like, no, you should do it.
I don't know if that says about me or them, but
both, everything.
You hear that, Chris?
But I've had my fair share. Okay, Robert. Thank you.
I'm glad to hear it. But yeah, it's such a useful tool because we often need that outside perspective. Because when you're in it, it's sometimes hard to see and it's hard to make sense of. And a lot of times we get fixated on the wrong thing. Like for me, for so many years, why? It doesn't help. It doesn't fix. It doesn't change. I would still love to know why. I would still love to know the answer to that question, to be perfectly honest, but I know I'm not going to get it. And fixating on that is not what's going to heal me.
I mean, I already know the answer to this question before I even ask. Have you considered reaching out to this guy and asking?
No, I did often wonder what would I do if I
never even considered it. Interesting.
Actually, no, I'm lying. I did.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now that I'm really thinking, because I haven't in a long time.
Sure.
But when I was young, I did often wonder, like, what would I do if I was faced? Like, what would I do if I walked up and saw him? And, you know, my initial response was like, you know, rip his balls off and shove him down his throat. I mean, I was just like so angry, right? But then like my hope is that I'd be up leveled enough to forgive him, because who is forgiveness for? It's for me, not for you. But I think this is something I did think about a lot when I was younger, and I've forgotten about it. So thank you for like making me think, but I did. Cause I'm like, why did you do this? But kind of knowing he wouldn't tell me.
Yeah, of course.
I imagined him just laughing like he supposedly did.
Would not.
Yeah. He would just laugh at me. Right. And that made me more infuriated. So like, again, where would that get me? Right.
Of course. So have you gotten any reception yet? Have you had anybody reach back out to you about this?
I have. I have gotten some really beautiful feedback about, you know, either people knowing me, like maybe they knew me in high school, and someone I would never have dreamed would ever reach out to me. I'm like, God, I didn't know you struggled with all this stuff, and I'm so sorry. But also kind of inspiring them to get back into things like meditation or therapy or something that had helped them in the past, but they know they've kind of gotten out of it. And, you know, so I've had that response. I've had like someone said that I just somehow felt seen. You know, and they couldn't explain why or how. It's just like, I just really felt seen with this book. Like, and that was such a beautiful thing to hear. One of my college professors, you know, reached out to me and she's like, this was so difficult to read, but somehow, even though it was heart-wrenching and heartbreaking, it was also so inspiring and uplifting at the same time. You know, and that hearing that was really beautiful. And she was like, I'm you know, it's like, it was so heartfelt. So it's been beautiful to see like some of the, you know, the responses I've gotten. And like I said, some people haven't read it because they're like, I don't know if I can read this about you.
Yeah, your mom, right? That's
right.
Such an interesting.
I know.
Just think mom would definitely want to dive right in.
Right. I know. And I was worried about that. And because I told her, I had to call her and I didn't tell her I was writing this at all. I was like, so I have something to tell you. I've written this book. And I purposely tried to not talk about other people as much as I could. Because it's my perspective, because at the end of the day, it's my perspective. Right. And so I just said, you know, there's a couple of things that you may not love. And, you know, she was like, and this is where I think she's evolved. She's like, well, that's okay. You know, I understand this is your experience.
It's also 20 years ago.
Right. Right. But still, you don't know my mom, but so, like,
she can hold a grudge
kind of, but just like, you know, in the past, I think she would have been more concerned about what's in this about me.
I see.
Right. And instead, she was so proud of me and she's shared it with so many people, even though she hasn't read it. I'm like, you might want to read. Because, you know, but I did admit to her, I'm like, there's some F words in here. Okay. And she's like, oh, well, that's not good. You know, and I'm like, well, sorry, saying that was upsetting is just not strong enough for me, you know? And so she was a little disappointed in me. And so was my mother-in-law. My mother-in-law read it 3 times, amazingly, but she was like, well, there was some language. I'm like, yeah, okay. You know? Whatever. I'm like, I was cognizant of it, though. I was like, it's my real life, you know, I can, especially when I'm mad, the F-bombs be flying, you know? But I was like, okay, I'm going to use it when I feel like it's appropriate. And I'm going to not use it. I guess there are other words, right? But my father-in-law kind of looked at me. He's like, you used it when it's appropriate, Lynn. It's okay.
Okay, you're allowed to. Good.
No, well, thanks.
Dad says so. That's good. So I know this is kind of a weirdly fucked up question, but I'm kind of curious. Do you have any sort of gratitude for the, not being stabbed, but for having gone through the kind of the downs and then back up again and coming out the other side and being okay? I mean, is there any sense of you that's like actually that in a weird way has kind of been cathartic or useful in your life? Or
I do have a bit of that. I also still have a grudge about it,
of
you know,
course.
like
a
very large one. But like I said, in the hospital, there was something about this moment of clarity. It just felt so clear to me that I'm like, God damn, I'm really fucking strong. Like, I mean, holy shit.
If you were considering ending your own life before this, even a little bit, that should have been like that. Nope, doors closed on that. Never happening.
Yeah, and I will say that kind of proved to me, I was like, well, I guess I do want to be here. You know, it was like someone literally handed to me, hey, you felt like you may have not wanted to be here anymore. Well, here you go. Mm-hmm. And I was like, no, you know, like, no. And so, yeah, anytime, you know, because I still have to be careful with depression. It's a sneaky little fucker. But anytime I start thinking of that, I'm like, you know what? I chose to be here, and and I'm gonna focus on that. Like, I'm gonna come back to that. Every time it's like, no, I'm here. Every day is not going to be sunshine and rainbows, and that's okay, and it's not meant to be. But there is this certain appreciation for, I've experienced some really deep, scary darkness that a lot of people don't experience. And so therefore, I am now able to experience this incredible light that other people also may not get to experience, because it's kind of like, like if you live in this spectrum, well, I live in this one. So that's pretty fucking special.
Yeah. It makes you unique.
Yeah.
It's cool to have unique stories.
Thanks.
It's weird,
I know.
but it's awesome.
Right? I was also a baton twirler when I was that's usually my go-to. I'm like, what's unique about you? I'm like, I use a twirl baton. I don't normally lead with I got stabbed. But,
yeah. Well, you should try it sometime.
Maybe
see
I
what
should.
happens.
Maybe I should.
Yeah, see what happens.
Uncomfortable.
It'll definitely derail the conversation. The next person's like, man, I can juggle.
Right, exactly. I know. I'm like, that probably would make you stand above or stand out a bit more.
So, what's next? What are you doing after all this? You've written a book. Are you going to go on a tour? Or what are you going to do?
I would love to. I've seen a few different avenues, because I kind of think, well, maybe I could speak about it. But then I have to fight that voice. It's like, well, who the fuck are you to be speaking about anything? Like, why would anyone live? Why would anyone listen to you?
Get that out of your head right now. Seriously.
Thanks.
No, really.
Okay.
Do it if you want to do it. I mean, don't do it if you don't want to do it.
No, I mean, I do, but it's kind of like, what do I want to say? So again, it's for me, because again, I'm like this and that, and I could do this, and I don't know, and so it's kind of like, what do I want to say, and what would actually help people? Because my thing is, I don't want people to be like, oh, that's nice, and then just go about their day. It's like, I actually want to like impart something that could, even if it's that thought of like, without the dark, there is no light. And I didn't coin that. I didn't come up with that phrase, obviously, but it's like, sometimes you do have to go back to something as simple as that. It's not pretty going through the dark. It fucking sucks. But it's like, but there is this beautiful light you get to experience as well because of this. And so it's like, somehow you have to kind of keep that somewhere in your back pocket.
Totally.
And I think that alone is important, but,
and use it.
Right. And, and
polish
again,
it up and keep using it.
Right. And it's not always the easiest thing to keep in your mind, but it's like somewhere in that darkness, you have to know. You have to trust and know that light is coming, and it will be there. But it's also choosing to see it, because that was a big thing. I think I talk a lot about choice throughout the book. It's like, you also have to choose to see it, because, our brains really are wired to be negative. They are for survival. And so it's like, you could be like looking at this pile of crap over here, and there's a dancing unicorn over here. But if you don't look and see it, you're never going to see it, right? You have to choose to look. So it's that kind of idea too. And so I think that's a big platform.
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, pain almost entirely is in your mind, whether it's physical pain, whether it's emotional pain. You get to decide how much it hurts. Really, almost 100%. I mean, there are some types of pain you can't, but basically you get to decide whether you want to be in pain, and I think you have chosen to come out the other side. And it's pretty obvious that I think you've rounded a corner, if there ever was one to round. Like, this is definitely coming out the other side.
Thanks.
So, okay, where do people find the book? Where they get in touch with you?
You can find the book on Amazon currently, and the anniversary is May 9th, and my hope is to do a book on like audio. Was an audiobook. I was about to say book on tape.
Yeah.
That's how old I am. I know. I'm mentally aging myself. I'm like, oh, never mind.
8-track too?
Not that far, but not quite that far. But it's paperback, Kindle, and hardcover on Amazon. And you can find me at lynnforney.com or choosingsurvival@gmail.com.
Okay, great.
So, yeah.
Awesome. Well, Lynn, this has been really great. I really appreciate you coming down.
Thanks.
Yeah, it was so nice talking to you.
Yeah, you too. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.